Chapter 8: Conducting Usability Tests. Before we start talking about the guidelines that we have to follow in order to conduct a usability test, we have to define what we mean by testing a document. Testing a document consists of procedures for gaining empirical data about the usability of documentation products. بشكل عام اللي بدنا نحكي عنه هون انه we have to follow some kind of procedures. هاي البروسيجر بتساعدنا على انه نحصل empirical data عن اليوزابيلتي للدوكيومنت او that refers to the usability للدوكيومنت and its effectiveness and efficiency. There are different types of tests. حكينا سابقا انه عندنا 3 types of documents اللي هم tutorials, procedures والreferences. There's one type of test for each type of these documents. For example, a tutorial, its intention is to teach. So we can perform what we call tests for skills and understanding. بما انه الانتنشن to teach معناته we want to make sure that the users learn from our tutorial and understand all the skills presented in this document. The second type of documents اللي هو البروسيجر. البروسيجر اللي هو it's as a guide or presents set of procedures. We in this type of documents we perform tests for task performance. We want to make sure is it easy, or if we want to test if it is easy for the user to perform a task easily. The second type of documents اللي هو reference. A reference, as we said, the focus on the reference is to easily access the information. That we test for access of information. We want to make sure, or we want to test if the user can easily access any piece of information they want from their document. If you go back to figure 8.1 in your textbook, you will find many of the test points or the points you want to look for when evaluating the procedures or when evaluating the documents. The main focus of this chapter is to present some of the guidelines that we can use or we need to follow when we want to conduct testing for any kind of document. Guideline number 1: decide when to test. You can test at any time during the 9 stages of the documentation development process. Usually, you can test after you have a draft finished, for example, after the first draft, so we can see the areas that need testing. But in general, writers can test during the 3 major phases: design, writing, and field evaluation. First, during the design phase, we call it a predictive test. We test to see the suitability of the design specification and the production goals. During this phase, we have high degree of flexibility. What do we mean? Predictive test, we call it, because we still can predict problems, issues بالdocument before we start writing. This is during a design. وبالحالة هاي we have the freedom to change anything we want, so we can call it high degree of flexibility. We still have high flexibility of changing the document. This is phase 3 in the documentation process. The second thing اللي هي writing and the draft phase. We call it remedial test. علاجي. Immediate changes and retest to the document. Once we find any problem, we change it immediately and retest. Here we have moderate degree of flexibility. فهنا flexibility to change since we started writing will be less than what we have when we have a design phase. This is phase 5 when we go to the development of the documentation process. Field evaluation, and we called evaluative test. During this phase, any changes or any issues that happen have to wait for the next release, because we cannot look. In this thing, we don't have any flexibility to change the document. This is phase number 9. Tie testing to documentation plans or to document plans. Maybe you do not have time to tell all your documents. Concentrate on how to apply the program to the user workplace. We cannot tell everything, okay? We just need to focus on the user needs. Guideline number 2, select the test point. Since we do not have time to test all the procedures or all the features in our document, so we have to decide what kind of test point or what kind of issues we need to test. A test point is an issue or feature of a document that might interfere with the efficient and effective application of a program to the user work activities. بشكل عام أي feature أو أي issue موجودة بالدوكيومنت تبعتنا ممكن تأثر أو ممكن تأثر على effectiveness والefficiency للدوكيومنت تبعتنا بحيث إنه ينعكس هذا على اليوزابيلتي للدوكيومنت. We can call it a test point or test issue. Now, to define the test point, you need to have a sense of what kind of difficulties your manual poses to the user. نقدر نحدد exactly ايش التست بوينتس، لازم نكون قادرين على انه نعرف ايش طبيعه البروبلمز اللي might affect اليوزابيلتي للدوكيومنت تبعنا. The test points fall into 2 areas. First, problems with content, problems with document design. What we mean problem with content ممكن تكون related ل how accurate are the content. هل الستبس والبروسيجرز اللي احنا حاطينهم بالدوكيومنت match the real world؟ هل الدوكيومنت والبروسيجر match the right version of our software and so on. Problems with the document design ممكن تكون لها علاقة بالتكست سايز، التكست فونتس، الايمجز، اللي اوت، الفورمات المستخدم، البوليسي conformance with the conformance with the policy for the organization and so on. When we want to find this point, we have to look for places in our document where a mistake costs time and reduce efficiency. معناته هاي الاسsues او التست بوينت غالبا interferes in our document usability لانهم اما بيزيدوا costs to produce a document or to finish a task or reduce efficiency in our work. This point could be body text size, heading size, screens cropped versus whole screen, cues, page orientation. So we must test task with high chance of user failure or high cost. حكينا سابقا انه لما بندور على التست point, first thing we need to find things that might have high chance of user failure or high cost. هذول اللي بنسميهم testing it. Test complex tasks, one of a kind, high abstract or technical task. Also, a technical task have to be tested. This, it might be hard for the user to follow or to understand. Test document design strategies such as terminologies, index, icons, heading, navigation, special condition, and format. هذا اللي هو document design strategies. فهذول 3 things we have to focus on when we want to look for tasks that we want to, for points that we want to test in our document. Guideline number 3, choose type of test. There are 3 types of tests. First one, performance test. In this test, we test whether users can successfully complete a given procedure. We call this can they do it test. So we want to make sure if the user, when they read our document, can perform any kind of task or any kind of procedure, and if that increases their performance. The second type of test understandability tests. Tests whether users can provide evidence of what they have learned. This we call it can they understand it test. In this test, we said it's not enough to learn like a procedure. We want to make sure if our user understand these procedures and they can apply them in their environment or not. Type number 3, read and locate tests. Tests how effectively users can locate a given topic of information in a documentation set. And we call it can they find it test. But the major thing here performance test الفocus على انه if I can follow the steps and I can complete the procedure. So can we do it? Its second thing, understandable test, can we understand it? Also, it's not enough to follow it. Did we understand it and can apply it in our document? Number 3, read and locate. Can they find it? هنا بشير للاccessibility and if it's easy to find or locate any piece of information in our document. Guideline number 4, set performance and learning objectives. Because we want to test or our test to measure the actual behavior, we must come up with numbers that correlate with the kind of performance we want from our users. بشكل عام بما انه احنا بدنا نعمل تيست our tests or we want to make our tests to measure actual behavior للuser while they are using our document, and during the test objectives or when we put test objectives we have to put some kind of numbers that measures how usable our document is. For example, if I want to test if a user can find a specific feature in my document or a specific information in my document in my software easily, I can say if the user can find this information in 5 seconds without mistakes, the software is or the product is usable. هون بالحالة هاي أنا حطيت ال 5 seconds as a measure. These are often called operational objectives. فبنقدر نسميهم either performance objectives أو operational objective. There are two broad categories of performance objectives. في عندنا time related وهذول اللي هم related to the time to perform a task. مثل ما حكينا سابقا حكيت انه if I find a specific information in 5 seconds, this means الدوكيومنت او البرودكت is usable. هنا انا حطيت ال 5 seconds واللي هي time related objective او performance objective. Error related refers to the number of errors. Sometimes we have acceptable number of errors. فبحكي for example if I can add a project in NetBeans without any mistakes هنا or without any errors. هنا حددت the number of errors that I can accept consider انه البرودكت تبعي usable or effective. Now if general performance objective. The performance objective states how long a procedure should take, and we call it sometimes the exit criteria. It's a criteria that a task must meet to exit the testing situation. Now, when I'm testing, I will keep testing till I get to a point I meet what we call the exit criteria. برجع للإكزامبل السابق. I will keep testing my document till I get my user to the level that he can find the information in 5 seconds without mistakes. إذا وصلت للمرحلة هاي إنه اليوزر they can find the piece of information أو information they need in 5 seconds without mistakes, في الحالة هاي I got to the exit situation أو exit criteria. Performance objectives simply put numbers and measures on that behavior. We can put numbers related to the speed, number of errors, space, volume, and so on. Make the test objective. Objectivity means that you try to set up the test in a way that you do not bias the outcomes too much. So the procedure does not pass automatically. Do not be biased. When you do bias, or sometimes bias can creep into your test from work pressure or other factors, as you only care about getting the test from signed because everybody else does it this way. Now, sometimes you might be biased when you test your document for many reasons. ممكن تكون related للwork pressure or other factors. لأنه in this phase you might be caring about only how to get the test form signed. Then everyone does it. But this might affect على الأوتكم to your test. When it affects the outcome to your test, that means like you will affect the productivity للdocument. فعشان هيك دايما make your test objective and focus on its goals. Select testers and evaluator. The tester is the person who administers the test, arrange the meeting with the users, set up the test situation, record the test activities. So basically the tester is the person who is preparing for the test, who is like getting the test ready. هنا the second thing is the evaluator. The evaluator is the person who's taking the usability test. فإنه عندنا قلنا ايش التستر وايش evaluator. Now the evaluator can be either first the actual user, and if we've chosen the actual user because they have some degree of subject matter knowledge. If the evaluator is the real user or the actual user, هون عندهم some knowledge about the product اللي احنا بنحاول نعمل له testing. The second thing, similar to actual user, and we call them the proxy users. They have no knowledge about the software product, but they are the same type of users as the actual user. Number three, not similar, they have no knowledge and they are different type of users. Guideline number 6, prepare the test materials. What kind of materials we might need when we test our document? We have written materials, location of the test, kind of hardware and software equipment that we might use. كل هذول بنسميهم test material. So we have to prepare them before we start with the test. Now, there's something we have to talk about here, which is pilot testing. What do we mean by pilot testing? Pilot testing means test the test. It's a way of reviewing your test. Guideline number 7, set up the test environment. The environment for your test may range from the user work, low field, to the controlled laboratory. That means we can test either in lab or in the user environment or the field. The best chance to learn about the actual use in context of user work and information environment comes from the field test. المقصود هون in order to get good feedback or get good comments about our document or to get useful reviews or tests output, we have to test in field because we are testing with the actual user in their environment. Record information accurately. Guideline number 8. Record using voice and video recorders, plus take copious notes. That means we have to take many notes so that you do not miss anything. And we have to try to synchronize our notes with the recording بحيث انه we have to like know for which kind of notes we wrote for any piece of the recording and so on. Use accurate methods of recording what to record what you see and hear, such as cameras, voice recorders, observations, and so on. Number 9, interpret the data. Interpretation requires you to take into account all the elements that can go wrong with testing so that you get clear results. بمعنى انه هنا في عندنا different variables او many variables can affect the test results. For example, this might be related to the user, old user, young user, experienced users who doesn't have knowledge. These might affect. في عندنا other factors or variables ممكن تكون related لل environment. Sometimes we have unsuitable environment ممكن تأثر على test result أو how we can equipment devices that we are using are not good, فهذا بيأثر دائما على test results. So we have to take on a lot when we try to interpret the data. لما نحاول نعكس الريزلت اللي بنحصلها على التست so we can improve our document لازم ناخذ بالاعتبار انه في بعض ال variables that might affect the test result. It's not just calculating data and making changes justified by the number. It's also require a common sense. وهذا اللي بنحكيه. You have to use your logic when you try to interpret the data. Okay? لأنه في عندنا different variables might affect the test result. Last guideline, guideline number 10, incorporate the feedback. All the comments or the feedback or the observation that you get, you have to incorporate it or you have to put it in your document so you can change the design and try to retest your document. لأنه no point of testing unless you incorporate all the changes and apply it in your document. Do a pilot testing. What do we mean by pilot testing? It means test the test. It's a way of reviewing your test to see if your testing material will gather the kind of information you want to do. بشكل عام, when we prepare a test plans and test material, we want to make sure after we done this test, okay, that we will get the good information that we want that will help us to improve the productivity and usability for our document. فبالحالة هاي بنحاول نعمل retest لمين أو بنعمل test للtest point, للtest issue, للtest material that we are preparing. This test help us to improve what in the following area. First, instructions. Do the guidelines you give to evaluators are enough to test correctly? فأول شغلة بنركز عليها بالتست when we want to test it, هل instructions هل guidelines اللي أنا حاططهم للevaluator enough to be understood, enough to test correctly? Second thing, terminology. Are the terms easy to understand? هل التيرمز الموجودة بالinstruction بالتست material أو بالتست تبعي هل هم all understandable؟ هل user familiar of them? Does that mean they will be able to understand my instruction? Timing. Can the user perform the test in the allocation time? Now, for example, if we put some of the instructions and we said that for the user have to test in 1 hour, هل 1 hour enough to test all the instructions? So we have to check on the timing. These the things that we focus on, or these are the test issues we focus on when we do the pilot testing for our test material. What is testing? Testing usually requires a tester, evaluator, and subject material. هذول three things بنسميهم الcomponent of test situations. A tester. Who are the testers? Tester can be a writer, specialist, or human factors. Who are the evaluators? The evaluator can be a user or abuser, a user proxy. Now, what's the subject material? Subject material is the product that we are trying to test. هو الدوكيومنت اللي we are trying to test. وهذا ممكن يكون either manual test, printed, or online. Now, testing resembles reviewing, but there is some kind of difference between them that they related to the kind of information they create. Now, how reviewing differs from testing? Now, reviewing produces comments, while this produces empirical and statistics data, produces numbers. Reviewing develop information about conformance of a product to schedule and policy. Now الفوكس بالريفيوينج بيكون على هل الدوكيومنت conforms مع البرودكت design issues، هل الدوكيومنت conforms to the organization policy or not. بينما بالتستنج we try to check numbers to measure how, like, usable our product or how usable our document. Reviewing provides you with the number of user reactions. These are the only numbers that the reviewing give us. بينما testing will give us like numbers related to how many times like the user passed like the task, how many errors did they have while they are finishing a task. Reviewing do not occur in labs, instead in offices. While when we test, we have to use either lab tests or a field test. In testing, we set the performance criteria. We get the real users to try the procedure. These are the real differences between testing and testing can take many different forms. We can also call the type of test as minimal test and elaborate test. And this naming related to the place where we conduct a test. For example, minimal test, we can call it also field test. And during this test, the test point or the issues that we are focusing on, such as the body text size, the heading size, the cues for steps, and the page orientation. The second type اللي هو elaborated test, and we call it sometimes a lab test. We need IBM labs, VCRs, cameras, digital timers, microphones, and computer labs. Usually, testing involves performing tests and preparing reports based on the results of the test. When we think about testing, we have to think about it in two directions. First, it's a corporate priority, and second, it's a high cost endeavor. Means when we say testing as a corporate priority, we mean these research and development organizations where they produce high product or high technical products. These companies, for them, testing is a high priority because, like, they have to test their document or they have to test their software or their product before they send them to the end user. Testing as a high cost endeavor that related to the cost of lab rooms, renovations, maintenance, testers, and evaluator. All this require cost from them. So it requires time and equipment. And as we mentioned in the previous slide, corporate testing adds high cost, and sometimes they ignore or resist the user-centered design. Because of this, writers usually go to what we call a field testing. Now, what are the advantages of field testing? Many software documents are turned to field testing as a way to gain valuable information about the use of their documentation. Because when we test, we usually take the user this material to the actual user and gather data on the effectiveness of user document. Basically نعتبرها it's a way to gain valuable information لأنه we test the document in the user environment with the actual user. But this is the best chance to get any information related to the effectiveness or usability of our document. The following are things you can learn from field testing. First, when type of information that we gain, first, information about the specific individuals in the field, their age, their gender, their education level, their expertise, environment and office design, like a team structure and so on, user communities, information access or how they access information, source of their documents and so on. And last thing is software use. Do they use it for training, upgrading, purchasing, and so on. Also, we can know about the information use. Do they use it for sharing, storing, or whatever? User satisfaction, effectiveness of document support, and so on. Field testing guidelines. While most users welcome you into their workplace, they will most do if you approach them with professionalism and respect. بشكل عام, in order to get the benefit out of your field test and in order like to be welcomed, you have to respect evaluator, or you have to respect field people, and you have to consider them as partner and deal with them in a professional way. Here are some guidelines you need to follow when you do a field test. First, do a preliminary research into the company and users. Second thing, prepare a well-designed test plan, schedule, list of resources, objectives of the tests. Number three, prepare to compromise. And when we prepare to compromise here, sometimes we might have expectation that the tests will be in such a way, but we might face the challenge or the problem that we have fewer people to test, less time, so we have to plan ahead and accept our situation. Vocabulary test. If you use the right kind of vocabulary in your manual, you have better chance to evoke divergent thinking and achieve the goals of efficient and effectiveness. In general, بشكل عام, one of the key to the documentation success is to use a good vocabulary or the right kind of vocabulary. Vocabulary that can be familiar for the users, can be understood by the user, and not ambiguous. This will help us to achieve our goals of efficiency and effectiveness. We have two kinds of vocabularies to consider when we deal with the user. Subject matter use terms, and these are the domain terms, vocabulary related to the product that we are trying to document. Second thing, computer terms, and here we mean both hardware and software terms. Two vocabulary tests you can employ. Now, we talked about what kind of vocabulary we can focus on. What are the tests that we can perform or we can do? First, match definition with terms, scramble list of terms and list of definitions to match. The first approach, our first method, we can bring some of the terms and their definitions, scramble them, and make like the user to match them or select between them. Second thing, we can ask for definition and user to provide a definition. This is the second method when we test our vocabulary. Data interpretation. How to interpret the test data. Whenever we make generalization about data, we assume that what some specific example show as true necessarily represent the whole, and that's not right. For example, 9 out of 10 of our procedures meet the acceptable performance. As we said, 9 out of 10 meet the acceptable performance objective. Then we assume the 10th one will also meet acceptable performance objective. That's not always true. We give a number to something is enumerable, and such generalization necessarily contain flaws. For example, we have a simple example, we call it the coffee example. Most people say a good cup of coffee consists or contains sugar, cream, and hot. And that's not true for everyone. Sometimes people they like it black, so it can feel like just the coffee, no need for sugar or cream. Sometimes people they like it with only sugar without cream and so on. But that doesn't mean so if like 9, for example, person agreed on this, we do not assume that the 10th person will agree on the same criteria. The conclusion here, avoid generalization when you try to interpret data. Interpreting test results means converting the data you obtain into document design changes. The focus or main goal of the testing that we try to get data statistics about a document and convert this data into design improvement or design changes. Now, when we do the changes, if we make changes based on the just only the data, this means that you may overlook a bias you had in your test that would invalidate a result. Depending on only the data, when you make the changes, that might make you biased because there sometimes some of the decision that you might make ممكن تأثر على results بالdocument وتأثر على design للdocument. For this reason, you need to stay aware of biases. Don't be biased to any opinion. Make sure that any changes to the documentation reflect what your team members and your users see as reasonable and based on a common sense. That means when you try to interpret data, don't depend just only on your opinion or like the opinion for like somebody who's expert in documentation, because sometimes these opinions might have problems or they might affect usability للdocument تبعك. We conclude this chapter with the testing paradox. The earlier you test, the weaker the results, but the easier it's to make changes. The later you test, the better the results, but the harder it to make changes. Finally, try to distinguish between problems of documentation and problems of the product. That means when we try to test, if we found any problem related to the software, you do not need to change it. You can mention it in your document, but it's not your job to change anything related to the product or the software itself.